What's going on, bottom line viewers? It's Mitch back here with another draft grade video analysis on the Dallas Cowboys draft. And I'm joined by none other than the Dilly Vanilli to break it down for us. This was not a very eventful draft for the Dallas Cowboys as they were without a first round pick, but we all know that they got that first round pick back in terms of a wide receiver named Amari Cooper. So that does kind of help the outlook of the Dallas Cowboys draft. But Dylan, before we get into absolutely anything, bro, I got to hit you with this. The Cowboys drafted Michael Jackson and Joe Jackson in this 2019 draft.
Well, that should already make us winners anyway, so at least a positive grade. I was looking through and I'm like, Michael Jackson, let's go, baby. We got a bona fide star in our hands. But, you know, I like it. I liked it.
All right, so what's your overall thoughts of this class? I know they didn't have a first-round pick, but they had a second-round pick, and they were kind of filling out the depth in their roster. First off, though, like before we get into the picks and like individually go down the picks, what did you want them to pick?
Well, I thought we were going to go for some safety help in the first two rounds. Obviously, we didn't have the first-round pick, but I thought a safety was in need for our first pick of the draft. And I thought that was going to be a big useful tool, was getting somebody in the safety department. But we didn't do that, and we did that quite later on in the draft. Actually, I felt like what we did was add depth and not really what's the word? We didn't really go for like a replacement or we need this help immediately. We just needed or what they were looking for was more depth than anything, which I think they accomplished to a degree. We'll talk about that as we go pick by pick. But I was more looking for a safety in that first pick, and we didn't get that. So,
all right. So, would you have to give you can't give them an A+ because they didn't pick a safety?
Yeah, no, I can't. Well, even if they got a great safety, I don't think I could give them an A+ from this draft. But their grade does a little lower a little bit because they didn't get that.
All right, so let's start off with their first pick, which was their second-round pick, Tristan Hill from UCF, defensive tackle. And when I was watching the draft live when he went through and he got picked, and I was kind of thinking, makes a little bit of sense. I was sort of thinking they might go with the safety as well, possibly a receiver in the second round, but they went with a defensive tackle. Just give your thoughts on Tristan Hill and where he'll fit in the scheme of things on the Dallas defense.
Well, first off, I also thought maybe a receiver would be picked. DK Metcalf was still there, and he went to Seattle, so that was a little disappointing for me personally. But Seattle did get a great pick, as Kevin will talk about. But Tristan Hill, defensive tackle, UCF, this makes sense for us because our defensive line did get bumped with David Irving basically being gone from existence and Randy Gregory being who Randy Gregory is. So you need to beef up that defensive line, make sure there are reliable guys. And Tristan Hill, late second-round pick. I think he was a solid talent. I had him just outside the first round in terms of prospects, so I think it was a good value at number 58. I was kind of surprised by the pick because I was excited going into it. I'm like, I have to think about that for a minute. So I thought about it, leaned on it, and I was like, okay, this makes a lot of sense. It helps out that defensive line that has a couple of really solid players, just not a whole bunch of recognized talent. Tyrone Crawford, Malik Collins, they all beef up that defensive line and move around. So a guy like Tristan Hill can come in whenever needs to. If those guys are hurt for a drive or whatever, or, down the line, if he needs to replace one of those guys, I think he'll do a solid job on that defensive line. I think it was a good pick.
And that we talked a lot about increasing the wealth of strength on your team. And the Cowboys' strength the last year was their defensive line. They went out and they had to do a lot of replacing and a lot of kind of figuring out who was going to be on their team, who wasn't, because, of course, David Irving left. And as you brought up, Randy Gregory left. So those two players were out of there. They brought in Christian Covington. They brought in Robert Quinn, and those players helping out. But then they also spent 2 picks on the defensive line in the draft, as we brought up Tristan Hill. So they have a really good rotation and almost 2 lines deep. Like they have DeMarcus Lawrence, Malik Collins, Antoine Woods, Robert Quinn, Taco Charlton, Christian Covington, Tyrone Crawford, Joe Jackson, who's the other pick, Dorrance Armstrong, who they picked late in the draft last year, who I liked last year, Tristan Hill. Let's talk about Joe Jackson. Joe Jackson, the defensive end. I also felt like this was kind of an under the radar need for the Cowboys because it plays such an important role on their defense that they do need those guys to rotate in there when, DeMarcus Lawrence is tired or one of these guys is injured. What's your thoughts on Joe Jackson?
Yeah, when you get a late round pick like Joe Jackson, it obviously helps out your team quite a bit. And DeMarcus Lawrence, does play a great role in their defense. So sometimes he's going to be like, hey, can I get a series off? And this guy can come in and play well. And I think he will play well for, sixth round pick. So overall, I think, like you said, there's so much talent on that defensive line that there's basically two there. And when you have Joe Jackson there as your second piece, or obviously in the defensive end, like fourth defensive end, I think it was worth the pick here.
Yeah, so he was pretty productive in college. He had 24 sacks, 34 and a half tackles for loss. So obviously they felt, being from Miami, team him up with Michael Jackson, his former teammate. So funny that, he had the production, and hopefully he can come through and be at least like a depth player for them. I could see Tristan Hill maybe being a depth player, role player this year, and then maybe taking a bigger step next year to being possibly a starter because he was a second-round pick. They're going to give him that time to grow, but as a second-round pick, he's probably expected to come into a bigger role next season. Outside of those guys on the defensive line, they had a couple of other picks. They had one pick at linebacker. They had Michael Jackson at corner and Donovan Wilson at safety. Any of those guys that really stand out to you as great picks?
In terms of the defensive positions, Donovan Wilson, safety from Texas A&M, I did watch quite a bit. I thought that was a good steal at pick number 213. When you're going very late in the draft, you're looking for guys that are just going to help fill out the depth chart, and they need to come in for a certain role. They can, or if something happens. And I saw him, a decent amount in 2018. So I like what I saw from him. Of course, the Michael Jackson, Miami cornerback, was a nice pick here at 158. I don't think he's going to light up the world, and I don't think our cornerback position is hurting all that much. I feel like it was more of our safety position because Byron Jones came in last year and did a fantastic job. So Michael Jackson's just going to come in there and add a little bit of depth, which if you were just to say Michael Jackson, that just wouldn't happen. But I do like that pick as well, just to add a little bit of depth. But, yeah, in terms of our defensive picks, which we picked most of them. It was only two non-defensive picks three in our draft, and two of them were running backs. So I feel like we were just adding more depth in those two. But Donovan Wilson and Michael Jackson, I think, were two under-the-radar kind of looks for Dallas.
Do you think that any of these players could really impact their defense right away? Like in year one, do you think any of these guys on defense would have a big impact?
I don't think year one they're going to have much impact. If anybody would be Tristan Hill. But since that defensive line is so stacked, it's going to be quite a hard thing to do. But I feel like if he could come in and, be a good run stopper and get a couple tackles for loss, I don't think Dallas would be complaining about that. Otherwise, I don't know if anybody's going to make an impact year one, but with contracts expiring next year, could be something worth noting next year.
All right, offensively, they went with Connor McGovern on the offensive line, Tony Pollard and Mike Webster at running back. Mm-hmm. I'm shocked they didn't pick a receiver.
I'm absolutely shocked, which is one of the worst things about our draft class this year, is we didn't get one at all. And considering there's a whole bunch of talent very late in the late rounds, it's very confused. Hakeem Butler was like the first pick in the fourth round.
Yeah, there were a lot of receivers who fell down the board. Just going through all these drafts, you see all of them. Hakeem Butler went to the Cardinals fourth round. Like there was a lot in the second round where they had a pick. There was a lot in the third round. Like second to even I saw a couple guys like the sixth, fifth round that there were some decent receivers that they could have at least taken a chance on.
Yeah, the Redskins even got I forgot what his name is off the top of my head, but they got a really great receiver in the sixth round. Like, that's crazy. I'm trying to look for it. I can't find it at the moment, which is sad for me.
I would tell you, but I haven't done their breakdown yet.
Oh, Kelvin Harmon.
Kelvin Harmon, okay, yeah.
NC State. That's a really good talent that's second round in most drafts, and he went to the sixth round, and the Redskins got him, which, the Redskins had a great draft. So if I'm also looking in terms of division, that's also hurting because the team did so well. Then there was also the Giants, but the Redskins obviously did a great job at what they did. So I was very disappointed by that. I was happy we did draft a running back, Tony Pollard from Memphis, and we also did get Mike Weber, but we needed that depth for Zeke because other than Zeke, like really who is our backup at this moment? We don't really have that standout running back. And I'm not saying Tony Pollard's like a standout or anything, but just getting Zeke some depth because of how much he does for that offense. I think he was probably on the field the second most out of any running back last year. Correct me if I'm wrong, but he was on the field for an extended amount of time for the Cowboys. You need somebody like Pollard to come in, but that was good. Not getting receiver was not good whatsoever.
Yeah, I think the backup running back in general was an underrated need because behind Zeke, like they have Darius Jackson and then the two rookies. So you needed a running back.
Needed somebody. Needed somebody to come in and fit in for that team. I mean, because like I said, it's one of the more underrated things. You're gonna tire a running back so quickly if you use them like that. And Zeke's workload is pretty heavy. So getting Tony Pollard here is a nice pick.
All right. Anything else about the draft that you kind of want to point out?
I do want to point out that I am just a little upset that we didn't go safety. I know we talked about it earlier, but I want to put this as the biggest thing for me. So we didn't get safety. The only thing that we really helped out for ourselves with safety, like in terms of free agency and draft, is we did get Donovan Wilson, who is a good safety, but I don't know how much of an impact he's going to have this year. And we got George Iocca, who's old and not like the best player. And considering the names we thought we were going to get in free agency, plus not getting any names in the draft is a big double negative because we thought, oh, here comes Eric Berry or we're going to get Earl Thomas. And then none of that happened, which I'm not expecting them to go, spend a whole lot of money, but getting one of those guys would have been great. But we also decided not to get anything in the draft. So that was a little disappointing. Wide receiver wise, didn't go do much, but I think that the Cowboys overall in terms of draft, like the last decade or so, have been really good. Like there's been at least one or two picks every year. You're like, all right, that's a constant mainstay of the team. Like last year, Leighton Vander Esch, Michael Gallup. I'm pretty happy with those picks, especially Vander Esch. Year before, you got Chidobe Awuzie and Jordan Lewis, good starters. Year before that was Zeke and Jalen Smith. So I'm not mad about what the Cowboys did this year because I know how good their success has been. And years past, and I can't just be like, oh, like I need everything. But it was more of a depth thing this year, and I understood it.
The last thing I want to touch upon, and just bringing this up, is Connor McGovern was picked in the 3rd round, and La'el Collins is in his last year of his contract. They could potentially look to move on from him, or they could potentially sign him. I don't know if there's really any rumors surrounding that just yet, but Travis Frederick also has his disease and kind of didn't even play last year. So it was sort of important to get a depth player on the offensive line, especially in the 3rd round. We've seen many offensive linemen in the 3rd, 4th round really come into their own. And if you have a good enough offensive line coach, they can turn them into starters. Connor Williams as well, pick they had from last year who started for them, kind of was shaky. So do you think this has anything to do with Connor Williams being a little shaky, or do you think this has more to do with just filling in a depth spot for potentially La'el Collins, who could move on from the team, or if Travis Frederick has any future issues?
When I was going through the picks just a second ago, I brought up the 1st round pick from last year and the 3rd round pick from last year because I didn't think Connor Williams did all that great in 2018. He had some very inconsistent outings, and a lot of the commentators would point out his struggles more than anything else. So I think there's a combination of that. Like you said, La'el Collins' contract is over by the end of the year. And I think he's been a good player, and he was a steal considering how far he fell down in the draft when he was in there. But at the same time, he hasn't been like amazing compared to Tyron Smith or Zach Martin. So he's not going to be he's not going to get a huge contract is the biggest thing. DeMarcus Lawrence is still got to get a contract next year, or excuse me, we got to figure out all these contracts going on because there's a ton of people. Dak, Zeke for sure. Those 2 guys are going to be big contracts, and Amari Cooper. So you might have to leave. Yeah, like all 3 got to get paid next year. So you got to let somebody go, even if it's a little bit cheaper, like La'el Collins, and maybe this helps a little bit of depth in there. And he's not a bad player. Like he is McGovern is a good player. from Penn State, which I saw a little bit of. So, yeah, a little bit of depth and just, if anything else, a backup plan for a offensive lineman leaving next year.
All right, Dylan. If you had to give the Dallas Cowboys a grade from F minus to A plus, what would you give them?
I'm going to go in between here. I don't think there's quite a room for it, but between a C plus and a B minus.
All right.
On one hand, they did what they needed to accomplish and got the depth, which I probably said 4,000 times in this video. But they didn't get quite what I thought they would get in that certain position in the first or second pick. And it's not going to affect the team in year one. It's all about what they do afterwards that I think is going to be the big effect on this draft. So between C plus and a B minus for me.
I'm going to go with a B minus because I give the Dallas Cowboys the benefit of the doubt when it comes to drafting, because they've been so good at drafting over the past, for the past while, to be honest. They've been always a team that's stocked up more through the draft, and they've been successful building good teams with their draft picks. So I'm going to give them the benefit of the doubt with the B minus and taking mostly the best player available and filling in some depth spots that they felt were important. But like you said, I feel like wide receiver offensively would have been nice to have earlier in the draft or at all. And then safety a little bit earlier would have been nice to have as well. But obviously they went elsewhere. They went more D-line, O-line, and back to the basics for the Cowboys and back to more the foundation of what their team is about. We'll find out if it works out for the Cowboys this upcoming season and in the future. But right now we're both giving the Cowboys a B minus for their 2019 NFL draft. If you haven't already, Gronk spike the like button, subscribe to the channel for more NFL draft grades. It's Mitch, Dilly Vanilli. We'll see ya. Peace.
Peace.